First of all, thanks for coming to this talk. I know it's quite late on a Friday after lots of dominoes and the lights are down. So thanks for coming. So I am Shane Mallier. I'm a NCSC security architect, and I specialise in security monitoring, advice, and guidance to our customers. And Adam,
I'm another security architect for the NCSC, where I don't really specialise in anything, but I've just been helping Shane on this project.
Adam's done a lot. He's done all the videos that you'll see later, not to give it away. Okay, so how do we get here? Let's start with a bit of background. You might have seen this before, some from the National Cybersecurity Centre, and this is our mission statement. So we try to kind of raise the watermark across the UK to try and protect people from cyber attacks. And as I say, I kind of focus on that security monitoring angle, and it will become all a bit relevant. But you've got to understand this to understand why we've designed LME in the way it is, because we've got some constraints we've got to work under. So I go to customers quite often, and there's often the question about why do logging and monitoring, why do you detect? And this is kind of my little soapbox at the moment, which is a lot of the time I see in industry, we have the NIST framework, so it's kind of nicely split up the activities into the different quadrants. And the reality is that we often do the protect a lot more than the detect, the kind of operational security. And I think that there needs to be a bit more of an equal, not necessarily 50-50 split, but there needs to be more effort on the kind of the tech side. Which is good because all the previous talks today have mainly been around sort of things like threat hunting and how to run a SOC, which is really good to see. But I think this is kind of the situation we're in at the moment, which is why I kind of spent a lot of it's been about 2 or 3 years now, looking specifically at the kind of monitoring side of work. So we get different asks from our customers, but basically when people come to me, they say, I get emails on probably about a monthly basis now from a different government department. And it's often just like, we need a SOC, where do we start? We're going to outsource it. We need to make it slightly better than it currently is. And there's something on a scale between the left-hand side of we just don't have any logs or do anything at all the way to I really want to get to the right, which is the NSA SOC, that kind of Minority Report, shiny glass room. Obviously, nobody really gets there in reality, but I try and help them come somewhere along that sort of proportional way to get to where they need to be for their organisation. So given that kind of context, how can NCSC help? So I wrote this guidance called Introduction to Logging for Security. I think it was actually supposed to be security monitoring purposes. It was a nice little mouthful. That basically looks at the outcomes you might want to achieve as part of your monitoring. So it has a bunch of potential questions you might be asked during an incident, because there's this mantra of log everything, and that's cool, but really, I guess it'd be nice to think if you have an incident and somebody comes to you and says, which machine made this DNS query, who was logged in at that time, that kind of stuff. If you think about that in advance of the situation and then collect logs around that so you can accurately detect and answer those questions, that's what this guidance document does. It's got a table in there and kind of prompts you a bunch of questions. So this is one of our levers, I guess, as NCSC. We pull quite often, which is guidance and advice on our website. Prior to this, there was things like GPG 13. I'll mention that for people who are taking the bingo thing, but unfortunately somebody's already won it, so unlucky. And also, as I mentioned earlier, I do kind of that face-to-face consultancy with a lot of customers. The other way we help is what we call active cyber defense, which is kind of services we provide free for the point of use to government departments. So probably the most well-known is Protected DNS Service, which is effectively will sinkhole known bad domains if you point your service to it as a government department. But we'll actually, we're kind of doing the full thing there, where we offer you the service and we try and stop the attacks happening. So logging made easy kind of fits in between those two kind of levers. You've got the guidance and advice, which is think about these principles and go and do it. And then there's we'll just do this for you. This is about helping you help yourselves. So have we got a way to help people do logging, which is pretty general across a set of, a particular architecture, a particular environment, and that's kind of where logging made easy comes in. So we've aimed it at small organisations that have got no logging at the moment. They've got no budget. So it has to be free and open source. No tools have, no cost for tools. They've got limited effort. They don't really know what to start. They don't know the configurations they should be loading. So logging made easy is effectively a very detailed setup guide plus a bunch of things like group policy objects, scripts, and things that actually help you auto-configure parts of the steps. So I've got logging made easy on a slide. So this is, right, so as I sort of said earlier, it's aimed at the Windows estate. We're saying for those small organizations, so it's kind of around about 250 Windows machines, client machines. And what we do is we advise you to drop Sismon down on those machines, and we give you things like batch files to run as a scheduled task that will then download Sismon and run it and install it. We then do Windows event forwarding and event collection and send it to the Windows event collector. So WEF, or Windows Event Forwarding, is a built-in feature into Windows that effectively you give it a filter and you tell it, over GPO, you give it to a bunch of client machines and you say, send these subsets of your logs in your local event viewer folder to this remote Windows server. And it's nice because you're not installing extra software there, and it's all authenticated over Kerberos authentication. So and there's like encryption on the network, so we don't have to worry about that. It has things like there's a setting to say, do you want it to send the logs quickly, or do you want to send it with more sort of bandwidth efficiency and like chunks? So is it like minimize latency, minimize bandwidth? So it's all built into Windows. It's great, and then we start to see the logs building up in the event collector. At which point we kind of want to do something around analysis. So we install WinLogBeat on that server, and we put it onto an Elk stack, which is running on in Docker on a Linux box that we help you install. So there's a script that runs on that Linux box. So that's a really high overview. We're now going to hand over to Adam for a couple of minutes. So Adam was kind enough to make a test environment with a whole bunch of videos of the installation process. So I wasn't sure how this is going to pan out because it's kind of like basically Windows admin, but once you make it 4 times the speed, and you may not notice the mistakes that Adam made along the way, copying the wrong files, it's really interesting. So right, when Adam talks over it.
Thank you, Shane, for throwing me under the bus there. So before we start, you have to remember that LME is very much a case of using Windows components that already exist within your estate and using the functionality that already exists for you, just gluing it together. So by show of hands, how many people have looked to the LME documentation? Keep them up if you actually installed it. Okay. Well, hopefully we're pitching to the right audience then. So this is a very abridged version of Chapter 1. So essentially, what we're doing now is we're importing the LME GPOs and create the organizational units. And yeah, it's going at 4 times the speed. But this particular video for Chapter 1, end-to-end took me about 5 minutes. So you can do this in a very short amount of time. Like I said, you're just leveraging what's already built within your Windows estate. And at this point, we're just importing the GPOs for the server and the clients. And then later on, we'll configure the GPOs that actually get pushed down to basically say, hey, go push these logs to this server. You're not doing anything really heavyweight in terms of maintenance. It's just doing stuff, tailoring it to your environment. All the heavyweight stuff is already done for you. And if we skip this over a bit, and skip over some mistakes. This is the point where you're saying, hey, go point to this server. For some reason it restarted. And the last part here, on the WEC server, so you can't see it, but this is wec.testing.lme. This is a testing infrastructure within AWS. What we would like to do in the future is maybe present this infrastructure as a CloudFormation template or a Terraform, so people can actually have a play themselves and have a look and actually see how you do it properly. Yep, so wec-util run CS with the config. We do the verification that Chapter 1 works. You go to Event Viewer, and there is a subscription on the left-hand side, and you can see that there's an active LME subscription. That's all that Chapter 1 does for you. Chapter 2 is slightly different. At this point, we're trying to change the clients and provide files, actual Sismon files with sysvol. That's essentially what we're doing. So you probably already do this as part of your maintenance of your estate anyway. You're just providing sigcheck, which makes sure that you're running the latest and greatest version of Sismon, Sismon itself, an update script, and a config for Sismon. And that's not distracting at all. At this point, we're updating a scheduled task. So when the client comes online, does a GP update, it pulls the latest version of the Sismon update for config. So if you do have to make retrospective changes as the LME project grows and develops further, this script will automatically do this. So you don't actually have to go visit each of the individual servers and manually do it yourself. Again, you're having to say, use the programs in this location. So again, you have to tailor it to your environment. But as I said earlier, it's very minimal in terms of tailoring. And then finally, you apply the GPO to your organizational units for your clients. So if you really want to, you don't have to go big bang. You can actually just say, I want to test on these 10 perceived high-value clients. It could be your VP suite, it could be your C-suite, your execs, or you could just go for your full 250 clients. If you perceive it to be really important, you can say, actually, I want the subset of the clients, not this. So this is what you use your OU filtering for. And then finally, if this works, there we go. The third step, there's two derivations of the third step. There's one, this easy one where you just run a script and do self-signed certs for you, or the second one which you provide the certs for it. So it's completely up to you. But essentially, you go onto your Linux box, run a script. After doing a git clone, you basically say deploy, install. It does everything for you. It's literally a case of hit enter, go make yourself a coffee because it'll be done in 5 minutes time. Not even that. There will be a little mini pause where it says, I'm going to let Elasticsearch boot up, do its thing, then I'll configure it. And that's the only delay. And right at the end of this process, a username and password gets spat out, which you can see there being highlighted. And that's, you can only see that once. That's done and gone. So it's worth saving that. So then when you are done, it also spits out, for this version, a zip file with your certs that you then go put onto the WEX server, which then does end-to-end processing of encryption for your logs. So you don't have to worry about that. And then verify the Docker is fully working by going to a web browser, going to your Linux server IP address or DNS, putting the admin in the password it's given you, and then you can see Kibana's working. So Docker's doing all that behind you, behind the scenes, and it's in terms of log retention, it's all very much calculated based on the available space on that server. And basically what the script will do will go install Docker, install ALK, install Nginx, which just does reverse proxy to do the authentication. Does auto security updates, works out disk size and configure curator, which is retention of the logs, generates a self-signed certs, also generate the Kibana password, and creates a zip file for Windows Server. So that's exactly what the third video does. I haven't done a fourth video because that's chapter 4 is basically go to management, import JSON blob. That's all it is. Right. I'll hand you back to Shane.
Thanks.
So hopefully those videos are showing the kind of level of support I guess we're given to the user. So it's it's install these GPOs and they're here on the links, and like install this software and we give direct links to the binaries where we can, and the scripts as well. We get it to a point where we're trying to make it like a commodity item so that you just have the LME installed and it just sits there ticking over, gathering logs, deleting logs, auto updating, and so on. So this is a nice little video because it's a real life example of one of the NTSC reports on APT10. So at the bottom here, there's two commands that it says if you see this on your network, so some command being run, it could be an indicator of an attacker trying to do some kind of lateral movement or something. So this machine is got Sismon installed, logs are going back to the main database server, and we are typing in the certutil command, which was listed in that previous report, and proving that it works. It's decoding a file into a VBS file, and then you can go back to Kibana and you can look for certutil, and you will find, let's see when it expands, it basically has captured that process creation event when you hit enter on certutil. So if you were here for the earlier talk with Pete O that's sitting over there, he did a lot of work on Sismon and talked about the powers, and this is awesome. This is like, the process creation event has got so much information in it that's useful for threat hunters. So we've got the command that was run, we've got the username that it was run from, you've got the SHA-1 hash of the binary, you've got whether it's running the integrity level there, medium, means it's run as a user. If it's high, then it's been right-clicked and run as administrator. So you've got a whole bunch of information, and I'll probably go into that a little bit later, but it just shows the end-to-end between, like, some report comes out and saying, find this on your network, and then you can use Sismon and LME to gather it and centrally query that on your network. So a little bit of a summary. So it should take about a day to install without distractions. I think Adam mentioned we did it in 2 hours minus firewall changes because the person went to lunch with one of our customers. But once they came back, it was just started flowing in, and you could see the disks filling up. It's designed for 250 clients. This is important because the bottom bullet point, if I jump to, it's not a replacement for a professional tool. Like, if you've got money for an EDR tool, of which there are many, keep spending that money on that tool, because I'm sure it's going to be vendor supported. This is kind of a better than nothing solution where you're using, it's kind of a DIY logging solution, right? You're taking all the free and open source tools you can, putting them into a sort of an end-to-end solution, and getting that kind of central pane of glass. But and so the 250 clients, basically, the issue we've got there is that we've only got one server where the database resides, which means that it's going to be quite easy to overload it if you've got like 10,000 clients on that. It is technically possible to do some load balancing and have multiple servers doing that, but we have not put the development effort into that. So we keep it to one single server. It's a lot easier for patching and maintenance, and bearing in mind this is supposed to be kind of hassle-free commodity thing that just runs on your network. We have had one client that decided to roll it out over 5,000 machines, and then the feedback about LME was that it runs a bit slow. But that 16 gig RAM server with quad core CPU was like, it was getting a battering basically. There's a point when they said it did work. They were wondering why it wasn't responding to any commands at one point, but so the retention period is basically up to you. It's as big as your hard disk, so that script goes 80% of the hard disk. So it gives a bit of a 20% buffer, and then it just auto rotates around. And then in terms of that kind of sell to the customer and the sell to NCSC, so there's a bit of a, why would a customer want to do this? So we initially went to customers and said, this is really good as a kind of an insurance policy. So if you have an incident, this is going to reduce your time to respond and work out what happened, what the impact was, all the stuff you might get asked during an incident. It also reduces forensics costs, because you don't have to start doing may not have to do forensics on disks, because you've got all the process creation logs in a central location. But that sell didn't really go down massively well with a bunch of customers. In fact, we had one customer who said, I used to collect a load of logs, but then I didn't look, so I just switched the whole thing off, which was unfortunate because, when we go to customer sites, we like to have logs there if there's been an incident. So we've kind of pivoted the tool a bit recently to be more of an operational health tool. So I kind of describe it as something for the end of a help desk. So some of the dashboards that are coming out now allow you to do things like search for a username, and it will tell you which machines that user's logged into, and then you can search for a computer and then see all the blue screen events, all the application crashes. There's a dashboard that you query KB numbers on, so you can see software updates and whether they've been successful or failed. So my theory is that
includes AV as well.
That includes AV as well. Windows Defender AV, yeah. So the theory is that if the database falls over, if you've got like the help desk and they get a call in saying my Wi-Fi is not working, and then they use this dashboard to work out why, they'll get that database working again. Whereas if it's that kind of black box that just rotates around, if there's a software or hardware problem, you might find you have an incident and the thing's not working. So I kind of want to get people stuck into it and using it. So we're trying to give them some really immediate outcomes on the logs they're gathering. In terms of NCSC, why are we interested? So, for incident response purposes, as I kind of just mentioned, the amount of times we go to customer sites and they have no logs, and if they're not a government department, it's kind of not really feasible to say, could you install some government software on your network to gather logs? With this, we can say, this is all free and open source. The guide is just, you're the admin, you're installing it yourself. So we're going to probably start trialing that to some customers if they haven't got the money for commercial tools. And there's something about, as I sort of said right at the start, about raising the watermark across the UK to try and get people encouraged to do this. Next couple of slides, I'll talk a bit about some of the design considerations we had, because I think it's not immediately apparent. The architecture is quite simple, but actually to make it really, really simple for people wasn't actually as easy as it sounds, because you kind of want it to be low maintenance. So first of all, we took a bunch of cues from the community. So some of these were mentioned earlier in previous talks, like Seth's talk and Pete's talk. But Weffels by Jessica Payne was probably one of the first articles I came across. So this is Jessica's works at Microsoft. She wrote a blog about doing Windows event forwarding and using Power BI to query the logs. Great. So let's try and automate that was basically kind of the premise of this initially. There's also help by a guy called Cyber War Dog, who basically it looks a lot like LME, but it has a lot more tools on it. It's got kind of like pipelines in it, ML and AI and all the rest of it. So it's not really, if you know what you're doing, it's a really good tool. But for that kind of small business who just want it to run in the corner, it's probably not for them. But yet, we got a lot of feedback and we reached out. Swift on Security. So Swift on Security's published a Sismon config file. And when we launched this, which was the day before Cyber UK, so I thought it'd be a really good idea to reach out to some of the people we'd been in contact with just to say thank you. So I kind of was working from home that day, and I sent an email to our social media lead, and just like the social media lead knows everybody on Twitter, right? So turned out they've never reached out to Swift on Security before. So I said, could you just send them a DM and say, we're launching this product tomorrow, we're using your config file, thank you very much, you might just get some press interest. So hit send. 20 minutes later, I get a reply back saying we couldn't DM. We just basically had to send a public tweet, and now anybody can see it. Oh, and by the way, people are responding. So I was like, I obviously swore quite loudly in my bedroom, but you can see the timestamp there, 11:20 in the morning. So basically, all the tweets look like this. It's when you realise you actually work for an intelligence agency and you've reached out to a security researcher, an anonymous security researcher on Twitter. I'm like, what the hell have I done? But yeah, there's a lot of like cynicism about why we're reaching out. So first tweet was at 11:20. There's a very long wait until 2:20. But luckily they took it, they thought it was really good, and that actually they preferred the way we reached out because they get a lot of crazies kind of reaching out to them. So that's, that if anybody saw the original tweet, that was what was behind it. So why did we choose Sismon? I mean, there's been so much praise on Sismon. I really don't need to probably sing its praises more, but I like this diagram, so it's going up there. The one on the left is WinWord spawning malware.exe, right? It's a parent-child process. Feel free to nick it for other slides. You've got like, is this hash equal to this hash? You get some kind of random, threat report saying, look out for these hashes on your network. We can see that in Sismon. You've got things like, what's an admin up to? What's a particular user up to? I think that one's supposed to represent. And then this one up here, top right, pretty powerful, but process tree. So you can work out what normally starts the next thing. And if you start getting things out of sequence, then that could be weird in like boot up sequences. So Sismon is really, really powerful, but we only really expose a very small proportion to the users that use the dashboard because we don't want to confuse them. And as I said earlier, kind of focus on the help desk tools, which are more like binary yes, no, as opposed to like, have I got an attack? Have I not? You could accidentally set people's hair on fire and, waste time. The other lots of discussions we had around the hosting and the infrastructure. So the idea initially for LME was like, you basically have a single script you run. In fact, if anybody else wants to do this, they should, because I think it's quite a good idea. A single script where you put in your AWS keys and it goes out, creates your Elasticsearch service, it pops out your GPO, it can apply it because it's PowerShell, you run it with some elevated privileges somewhere. You could do the whole thing in a single script. And we actually developed that. We had a script which was like, I think about 500 lines of PowerShell, and it went from nothing to, working backwards, going create infrastructure in AWS, create the GPOs, apply them, push this, make the folder for Sismon, bang, bang, bang. You could do it if you're in the right place of your Windows network. That was great, but the thing is, we're government, so we can't go to customers and say, to do this free tool, you have to also pay for an AWS account. So then it was kind of like, well, maybe we'll do it for Azure as well, but then that's like double the effort, and then it's like all the other. So in the end, it was like we just can't go down that route, unfortunately. So we decided to do make it really portable with Docker, and then you can work out whether you want it on the Amazon's Kubernetes or the Azure or whatever. It turns out though that for some of the cloud providers, you can't just run like Kube on a single server, which is what we wanted for the kind of small charities, small businesses. So we said we can't follow that route of kind of using Kubernetes and still giving it to a cloud provider. So we took the decision to say to the customer, just install a vanilla Ubuntu box and do what Adam showed you, which was like 3 commands, and run that script, which will then like kind of configure the box up. So we've ended up, it kind of reminds me of, if anybody watches Silicon Valley, where they make that like server box, like, it's kind of not very modern to make an appliance that sits in a rack, but that's effectively what we've unfortunately made, but it works, right? So it's actually kind of cost effective as well. So on what some of the big providers, it's about £150 a month to rent a quad-core 16 gig RAM server with like, say, half a terabyte SSD. That's quite a big cost as it keeps adding up, but you can probably get a server for like £1,500 or something you stick under a desk somewhere. This doesn't need to be like massively resilient because the organizations we're pitching it to haven't got anything today anyway, so it's like kind of nice to have. The next slide, so updating LME. So this is really hard because we want it to be super easy. So we can put mechanisms in place to update the software. So the automatic security updates happens on Linux pretty easily. We have this batch file that when it runs as a scheduled task, it's checking if Sismon has changed on the server and if the config file has changed on the server. So it looks at the file version on Sismon and it does a hash check of the config file. If either of them changes, it redeploys, which is quite nice. But what I really want is, and this is maybe to the audience to have a think about, like considering it's across multiple machines, I want the ability to sort of type in one machine, update to LME, and it says, you are out of date of, your Sysmon version's out of date, your config is from 3 months ago, your winlog beat's not sending back the right stuff. And that's really hard. So at the moment, I think we haven't quite got there. We've got some ideas that we can maybe tag events to sort of identify what version of LME it was at the time. But because we're across, 3 kind of server, client server Linux box and 2 kind of different technology stacks plus Elk stack. It's really hard to kind of do that like easy, like what do I have to update? What's changed since the last time I deployed LME? But we'll get there. I will now hand over to Adam for anecdotes.
So we started rolling out LME to willing participants people who expressed an interest in this kind of environment but didn't have any money to actually do anything. So they were, like I said, willing participants back in January this year. And as part of that, we asked them to provide some interesting anecdotes about what they learned from LME. And these are some of the images that represent what we found. So far left, we have a USB cable. One of our clients had USB insertion events being logged through Sismon. So that was coming into LME. And they found one machine somewhere was constantly having a USB port plugged in, plugged out, plugged in, plugged out. Go on. To the point it was a couple of thousand in an hour or so. Yeah, so it was a massive amount of events. So they went to go trace it. Turns out the actual machine had a faulty USB port on the front where somebody was plugging in their phone to charge it. And I think either the weight of the phone or I don't really know exactly, but basically the solder traces on the PCB were failing. So it was just a micro fracture, and it was just enough for it to go registered, unregistered, registered, unregistered, which is quite an interesting event if you have somebody trying to, I don't know, if your policy says do not use USB, and then we can capture it. The middle one is a break glass account. So this was a domain admin account that was only supposed to be used in emergencies, and it was found to be used to be installing a wireless driver for a keyboard, I believe. Should not have been happening. So again, we're starting to see some really interesting events within LME. And finally, the last one, through week by week analysis of normal trend activities, we identified somebody using a program delete tool, 4 o'clock in the morning, deleting about 1,500 files. We thought, well, that's a bit weird. So raised it to our infrastructure team, who spoke to them. And it turns out, actually, that person was in the States. So the time isn't that unusual, and they were about to return the laptop back to our infrastructure team. So again, sanitizing the device, again, isn't unusual. It's just more of a case that we are finding these things. It's worth pointing out that we're not actually looking for malware at this point. So that's the reason why we're not saying, hey, we found malware. We're just not looking for malware at this point. So we'll go on to frequently asked questions. Are there any questions right now? I thought them. Okay. Where can you get the videos from? Eventually, we hope to have the non-speeded up versions on YouTube. I was kind of hoping that maybe one of the questions might have been a frequently asked question, which I could just jump to straight away. But if not, I'll just crack on. There will be Q&A afterwards as well, if there's enough time. So first question, what about other network devices and other critical services? Appreciate the Windows operates on a network fabric that can also provide enriched logs for you to do some malware analysis, or at least threat hunting. We could either choose to do loads of different things poorly or do one thing really well at this time. So it's not a case of no, it's just a not yet. If you have a particular need for a particular vendor, let us know. We can then prioritize that as part of the next part of the drop of LME. Similarly, we get this asked all the time because people like shiny things like me. People say we're not just a Windows house. We're not just one vendor. Again, it's just not a right now thing. But if you really want to say Mac OS is my big thing, I really want LME for that, please let us know. Or Linux as well. It's just not yet. And there's some massive development work required. And NCC Group, who've done an awful lot of the development work, we're trying to get them focused on the Windows products as part of the roadmap. And really another question, popular question that we quite often get on GitHub as well is why don't you use Technology X? And the middle one, on the top, is OpenDistro. Have anybody heard of OpenDistro? No? Okay, so OpenDistro is taking Elasticsearch free and then plugging in a whole bunch of security things that was missing. And this came from AWS. So it did some really cool things as well, like alerting. The reason why we haven't used it is because we already developed LME before it got open sourced, essentially. So I think maybe 2 or 3 weeks before we went open source on GitHub, OpenDistro was announced. So if they open sourced it 6 months ago, LME may be a different product. But again, it's all open source. So if you really want to use Grafana instead of Kibana, go knock yourself out. Does LME make sure I'm collecting the right events? No, I don't think any vendor can assert that unless they're doing full packet capture. And ultimately, you'll be paying for that. It's expensive to store that information. And we're all security professionals here. It's a game of whack-a-mole, right? So just because we know what the threats are today doesn't necessarily mean know what the threats are tomorrow. So LME, using peer-reviewed and well-respected methods like Swift on Security, Sismon config, and WEFLs, etc. We hope we're doing the right thing, but ultimately we can't say for sure. One more. Does the NCSC get a feed of my data? No, we're not going to be doing a SOC as a service for you. It's completely your data, completely your infrastructure. You may choose to put the data into an AWS Elasticsearch as a service, but that's your shout. And at that point, it's your decision for it to leave your shores. It stays completely within your shores. It doesn't need internet connectivity to work either. Can I use LME to do threat hunting? I thought I'd put a picture of Red Dead Redemption in there because we're all geeks here. You can. It's just, at the moment, we're focusing on trying to provide a single pane of glass, tick, to provide a customer experience, try and drive the adoption. Would that be fair to say? Cool. So, what is the future of LME? We have an active development within GitHub. So, this screenshot was from, I think, last week. It's already out of date. We've already accepted a merge. So, it wasn't a case of we released it into the wild and we're going to let it die. It's a case of we're doing active development. We have a roadmap for the next 2 years. Another really cool thing is Mark Rustinovich published last week. Sismon version 10's out, includes DNS. Hey! And we're already looking at dashboards to include this data. So top left, we've got DNS query. So there's top 50 DNS, and the bottom left is 25 apps calling DNS. So instantly you can start seeing some really high value information being extracted out of this information, which is really cool. And finally, we'd like to introduce more of the MITRE attack framework. We've heard about a lot these last few days. I think it's a really valuable thing. And that's essentially it. So, as I've already alluded to, we have a GitHub, we have a repo that anybody can contribute to or provide any issues or bug fixes, etc. Take a photo if you like. Just don't make sure I've got orange light yard. Don't get me in it. And please get involved. Ultimately, adoption will make the tool better for everybody. So even if you download it and only contribute a dashboard, people will really value those dashboards. Anything else to add?
No, I mean, so on GitHub we've got like the issues tab and the what's the other one? Sort of the ideas tab, or whatever suggestions. So people are actually actively kind of saying, "Could you try this?" Or I've tried to install it and this has gone wrong. And as Adam mentioned earlier, we've got somebody at NCC Group who called Duncan, who's basically we've got them contracted out and they're checking GitHub every single day. So they're on it. So. That's the end of our talk. So hopefully it's given you an overview of LME and kind of where it came from. So this is a little bit more of not massively technical, but it gave a bit of background about the development of it. Any questions?
I mean, my FAQ didn't work.
Okay.
Yeah.
So LME looks like it's designed for small little businesses, small little areas that don't have any security expertise and have very limited IT capabilities.
Yep.
Which are going to primarily be Windows shops, so they're going to be supporting a handful of Windows desktops. But you've chosen to stick it on a Linux server that's most likely going to be stuck under a desk, forgotten about for 3 years. You know, you've got a core piece of kit, taking all your logs on a Linux server that's probably not have the expertise to be looked at. What have you done to ensure that doesn't become a security problem in itself?
Yeah, so the Linux box, I mean, luckily, because we run that script on the Linux box when you install it, we do things like, auto updates is the first thing we do. But we're kind of hoping that the box is secure, like stable enough that it can sit there and just auto rotate the logs, not run out of disk space. But it was a big concern, like seriously was, because we went to one customer and we said, "Have you used Linux before?" And this is a security person, it's like a 120 person organization, and they were like, "Well, I have a Linux box. Do you know how to update the software?" And they're like, "Oh, don't worry, we can Google apt-get," because they had never done that before. So it is a bit of a worry, but I think the challenge is I'm not sure in our position what else, like I haven't come up with a suitable alternative that's Windows based. So we had one of our other customers, again, Windows, all Windows. So they tried to install Docker for Windows and then tried to put Elk into that. So that was kind of a bit of a fudgy way, but then that runs on Linux anyway. Yeah, I mean, if you've got any ideas on how else we can do it, like database software that allows you to visualize that's free, it doesn't need a license. So that's kind of like, we ended up going down Elasticsearch because it seemed like the most obvious solution. And then it was kind of like, how do you let them use Elasticsearch, but without making them realize they're actually using Linux, like under the hood? It's kind of we've even got things like when you're installing it, it shows you how to use PuTTY and WinSCP and stuff, because literally screen grabs, because we know that people probably have never done that before.
The other thing to mention is that Windows, Docker for Windows, I think, doesn't let all of the resources be available to the Linux box.
Oh, yeah.
Or the container. So you may need the 16 gig on your host, but that doesn't necessarily mean your Docker containers are actually going to be able to make use of that, so therefore the script may fail. Yeah. Because Elasticsearch it's Java, it's quite memory intensive. We may need to relook into that when Docker goes to the Windows subsystem for Linux, or Linux subsystem, which I believe is going to be coming out soon. So I completely take your point. If somebody is a completely Windows shop, maybe in 6 months' time when that is a little bit more further down the line, you don't have to rely on Hyper-V, all the resources are available, then yeah, I don't see why that couldn't be a thing.
It's kind of also why I mentioned on that slide that we've ended up with like a kind of appliance, because it's almost like when you get like a network gear, it's actually running Linux, but the user doesn't kind of know. So I'm hoping it'll be stable. Our test participants, it's been fine. It's been running. We've got one on our network. It's not been rebooted for since February or something. So, any other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.